We have a big agenda. It says my internet connection is unstable, so I don't know what I'll do if I get kicked off. We'll call this special meeting study session to order. It's 4 o'clock. Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Let's stand up.
If I stand up, everything will fall off my lap. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America,
and
to
to
the republic
Stand one nation, under God, indivisible,
liberty and justice
justice.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Certainly. Councilmember Hawkins Manuelian,
Here.
Councilmember DeGolia,
Yes.
Councilmember Widmer,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Lempress. I know that he's here. And Mayor Lewis.
I'm here.
I'm sorry, can you not hear me?
I can now.
Again,
Okay, good.
so before we go into public comments, I just want to take a minute to thank everyone, all my council colleagues and staff and residents for taking time to write me a note of condolence for my husband's loss. I promise you, I have every intention of responding to every one of them. It's meant so much to me and it's helped me a lot. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I am truly, truly grateful for the outpouring of love and support for me. So let's go on to public comments. Thank you.
And I don't see very many members of the public joining, but just for anybody that's joined from the public, you're welcome to make a public comment by using a few options. You can use the chat feature listed there. I will post a note in there, which you can send a message via text. I'll just say it. It's 650-687-7084 if you want to text me directly, or you can use the hand raise feature at the bottom of your screen. If you click on participants, there's an option for you to raise your hand and we'll recognize you for public comments. But we don't have anybody joining from the public. Or no, we do, but it's
Okay.
no, we don't. Sorry. So
Okay, we'll close public comment period then and go on to item number 4, which is consideration of a letter to the state of California regarding COVID-19 protocols for houses of worship. George, do you want to take this and kind of tee it up for us?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. You have the written staff report there, and attached to it is a draft letter that I wrote based on the council's request to return a potential letter to the state regarding COVID-19 protocols for houses of worship. It is a fairly broad letter. It does touch on the Supreme Court issues that were dealt with in New York, and the city attorney can provide a little bit of color around those. But it also touches on the desire to have reasonable protocols for houses of worship that are consistent with other types of businesses and operations in communities. So the council's free to edit the letter as you deem appropriate, not send the letter, send the letter and with modifications, pleasure of the council.
Thank you, George. Can I open it up to our council members for any questions of clarifying nature to George? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. Councilmember Widmer, this was something that you felt strongly about, and I'd like to have some comments from you about it at this point.
Sure. I think going to a house of worship is very important to people, especially in this time of extreme worry and concern. And they find solace in going to church. If it provided that a church provides for social distancing, blocking off pews, etc. Not doing all the items that they do normally with regards to singing everything or whatever, but just essentially going through the mass like when you went and sat, we were outside. It was a very quick mass, and they had the gospel and a quick homily. And you know, I think it's something that's important. And when we have, you know, some stores and things like that that are open for 20%, you know, as long as you have a mask on and you try to social distance, I think that the churches should be given the same. And so,
Thank you.
that's my point.
Does any other member of the council have any comments that you'd like to make about this?
I guess I do. First, we don't have any churches in Atherton. So we're picking well, let me back up. I agree with everything Bill said in terms of I see the value of going to church and for our psychological well-being, but I don't understand why it has to be inside. There's a lot of science behind why they made the decisions they made. There were a bunch of super spreader events that were church services, the choir being one that was national news and many others. And so this is a particular situation where you have people from different households sitting close to each other and they're singing and chanting. And when they do that, they spread the germs. So the thing that George sent out and that the CDC sent out is that when you sing or you're spewing out stuff so that the 6 feet isn't good enough. So it superimposes the 6 feet criteria. So just social distancing of 6 feet is not enough in a context where people are singing. The other thing is that it's different from retail in that at retail, you don't just sit down next to somebody for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or how long the service is. You're kind of walking through. And so the only time you're really around other people is when you're in line and that's 6 feet apart. And again, that's minutes as opposed to many minutes. So I feel like we should listen to the scientists on this because that's how a lot of people got it. It's been super spreader events. So I think if we were going to make a stand on anything in terms of the rights of the people, it may be something that's not as complicated as that one.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Manuelian. Anyone else?
I'd like to comment on what was just said.
Excuse me, Bill?
Yeah.
Just one second. We're not going to have a debate.
I just want to be. I want to be clear.
No, I would like to have somebody else talk about this
No
before
problem.
you have an opportunity to rebut. Mike, would you like to make?
Sure. Now,
comment?
yeah, and I guess I approach this sort of as a lawyer, but from my standpoint, the First Amendment is pretty clear that we shouldn't be, you know, passing any law abridging the freedom of religion, and that there should be special protections for certain freedoms under the First Amendment, one of which is freedom of religion. And I think that without getting into a dispute, I don't believe the science has been well thought through in this space or followed in this space. I think this letter just says follow the science and follow it uniformly. So from my standpoint, the letter is pretty non-controversial. I think, you know, if there's a particular reason that churches should be treated differently, then we should articulate that reason and treat churches differently. I don't think that's happened yet, but that's my perspective. You know, if we can't articulate a reason to treat churches differently, we being the state government or the county government, then we shouldn't. And then we should, you know, treat churches the same way we're treating everybody else, which I think is what the letter says.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Councilmember DeGoya, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do. I think the fact that we don't have churches in Atherton is not the most important thing, because we have residents that attend church, and while those churches that they attend are in no doubt one of our adjacent communities, the fact that they aren't in our community doesn't change the fact that they attend church, and I think that it's appropriate for us to comment on the subject because of that. I think that I certainly we have a right of religious freedom, and that should not be impaired. I don't know that the Supreme Court's decisions are dispositive on that with respect to health issues, because certainly it's appropriate to engage in, for the government to engage in health management where there are dangerous health issues. So I have a problem with the letter. I won't support the letter the way it is. I don't agree with referring to the Supreme Court cases. I don't know enough about those cases, and I don't know how they relate specifically to this issue. I would support a letter that advocated having the ability of people to meet for religious services indoors, subject to appropriate safety regulations. And I went online to try to look up what there is. And well, let me take one step back. The other thing in the letter that I object to is the lining up with attending religious services to be treated in the same way as going to a retail store or a commercial establishment or a shopping mall, for example. I think they're totally different things. I think that if, in fact, there are regulations that the state or the county is pushing forward that regulate the attendance of religious services indoors in a substantially different way that doesn't have a factual basis from retail or commercial, then that's a problem. But I don't feel competent to weigh in on that issue. What I know is that the numbers of people and the degree to which they are crowded and what they are doing in church or religious services as compared to in a shopping mall are significantly different. And when I went online to look up what the regulation is, unfortunately, I copied it, but I seem to have lost my copy. But what I saw that it said is that the current regulation is that indoor religious services can be attended to 25% of capacity. And there's some regulation around singing. And I'm not sure if there's some other event that's similar to singing, but obviously singing and where people are projecting from their mouths, there is a much increased risk of spreading this virus. So in my mind, that's reasonable. And I'm not well versed on exactly what the state rule is right now. I don't have any problem with a letter that says that we advocate and support our residents to be able to attend religious services subject to reasonable health regulations. But I don't think they should be lined up as being the same as going to retail stores or malls, and I don't think we should refer to the Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you. So, Bill, would you like to make your rebuttal now, or can I make my comments?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So I understand the feelings that Councilmember Widmer has expressed about the need for people to go to church, to go inside a holy place and to worship and pray for our healing, pray for our country, pray for unifying. And he did mention that, you know, he had had a mass for my husband, and it was lovely. And, you know, the beautiful church of the Nativity down on Oak Grove is so picturesque. And it was all outside, and the weather was nice. And so now that the weather's not so nice, people are a little bit more uncomfortable being outside. I have to tell you that I think that of all of our council members, I have probably been in more church services than any of you, bar none, because I was raised from a very little girl in churches in Kentucky, in Ohio, in Tennessee. And my father was the organist. We would get there first off, and we would be the last to leave because he started the services and he ended the services. Morning, noon, night, during evangelical weeks, we were there all the time. And I know how important that is. All my mom's relatives are Catholic, and every time they come out to visit me, we go to Nativity. We love the church. It's beautiful, and it is a holy, holy place. So I find it really discomforting to have started our 2021 council meeting with this potentially very emotional and polarizing topic, because I do not believe any of us wants to squash freedom of religion, freedom of worship, the freedom to express your faith in whatever way you want to express it. I think that putting such a huge responsibility onto the church leaders to thoroughly clean and sanitize and make sure that the people coming to the church are adequately spaced out and there's no singing or chanting, and everyone has masks and sanitizers, and there's just so many touch points in a house of worship that I think that we really run a risk of exposing our residents, and it's not something that we have control over because we don't have any churches in our jurisdiction. And so, but our residents do like to go to church. And so I don't have a problem with, advocating and expressing that freedom of worship and expression of your faith. I have a issue very much in line with what Council Member DeGolia brought up, because comparing it to the retail environment, and I have to say, I was in the retail environment at Stanford Shopping Center a few times before Christmas, and we had to stand outside and wait until there was enough space to go in. And still, I read that Stanford Shopping Center at the Black Friday has been hit with a lot of accusations of not keeping their people, clients safe. Anyway, I have the way the letter's written, I do not feel comfortable signing it. At the pleasure of the council, if a letter like this is going to be written, I would gladly pass it off to the vice mayor if he wants to sign that. But unless it's modified pretty significantly, I don't feel comfortable. So that's my comment. So Bill, would you like to now have a rebuttal?
Yeah. Well,
I'll give you like 3 minutes, okay? Because we've got a really big agenda, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that the key thing is you must meet certain criteria, and the criteria, obviously, we can I wouldn't want to be so definitive as to spell it out that make the list very, very long, and we would prolong things. But I can tell you at Nativity, for example, you have to make a reservation for a pew. They keep track of who's sitting where. Pews are blocked off. There's sanitizer everywhere. and they do have people between the masses come in and clean the pews. And so, I mean, if we can, so I don't see that there's a problem with that. And I think that if we meet certain criteria, they should have it. We're causing, sitting outside in the rain and the cold is not very helpful. It's bringing, health hazards to other people. So we can modify the letter. I don't have a problem with modifying it. It was a first tier thing that George put together. But I do think that, there should be some support.
I would like to rebut what you just said, because if we come up with criteria, right, we're not in a position of authority to come up with criteria that's going to be an overlay for the houses of worship in our general area. And a lot of our residents go someplace else. I mean, some go up to Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Some go over to the East Bay. So I don't think that we as a council have that authority to do what you're just saying that you want us to do. And it sounds to me like Nativity already has, some programs. So, regardless of what we're doing or could do, it's not going to affect. So does anyone else have something that they would say? And I'd like to wrap this up.
Well, I'll make a comment if I may.
Sure.
A quick one. I mean, I think we could have the letter changed to basically not refer to the Supreme Court or retail and shopping centers, but to say that we believe, I'm sure it says in here, there's the whole second paragraph that deals with the indoor activity and reduced capacities. I think that we can advocate that we think it's important that reasonable protocol, the last part of the third paragraph is quite clear that reasonable protocols can be applied that will limit the density of indoor service and services attended, but that we think that they're important to have. And we can include everything in the last half of that third paragraph, which really advocates the position. And the final paragraph, I would take out the reference to the Supreme Court, but otherwise I think that language is fine. I agree with the mayor that we shouldn't try to set guidelines or standards. That's something I'm sure that between, the judiciary on one side and the executive branch in the state, they're doing, and we're advocating this to the executive branch in the state. But I'm not opposed to sending the letter. I just think it needs to be changed.
Okay.
I don't know if you're in agreement with that.
Okay, so unless someone else has another comment, Mike, do you want to weigh in one more time on this?
Yeah, just a little bit. I don't think, as a practical matter, I can sort of bring that temperature a little bit, because I don't think the governor's waiting anxiously to hear what the town of Atherton has to say about, about this issue. But I do think that religion is different in America. I really do. And that the First Amendment is all about, not prohibiting the free exercise of religion. And so I think it's worth making that point, that if we are going to interfere, not the town of Atherton, but the state of California or the county is going to interfere in the free exercise of religion, there better be a real good reason for it.
And you don't think COVID-19 is a real good reason?
I'm sorry, pardon? I don't think that there's anybody who's been able to articulate a reason to treat churches differently than similarly situated entities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they're doing. And I think that's, that is essentially what the Supreme Court said. But, again, this is not something that I think is horrifically important. It's an important point. I don't think it's something that the town of Atherton, needs to be leading, but I'm comfortable making that statement. So, yeah.
Okay. Diana, did you want to make any other comment? Everyone else has. Diana? think she's muted.
She's muted, yeah.
Sorry about that. What I was saying is I wonder what the goal of the letter is. By the time we take everything out of it, we're basically writing a letter to the state to say we believe in people's freedom of church, which is what is the goal of doing that? So I question that. And I do think there is a very sound science about why they should limit the in-person when we're in the middle of COVID. I think it's right in the CDC statements about singing in close proximity. And we're not telling them they can't go to church. We're just saying, do it on Zoom or do it outside until until it's safer for people to do it indoors. So I feel strongly that I don't think we should be sending this letter.
Okay, George, what's our next step here? I don't think it calls for a vote, does it?
Yes, it's whether you wish to send the letter or modify it or otherwise. I can certainly modify the letter based on some of the comments from the council this evening and return it at our next meeting, not next week, but the meeting in February. We're still going to be in the midst of COVID-19 and possibly even the regional stay-at-home order by that point. So it's still relevant if you'd like me to do that. Otherwise, you could take action not to send the letter.
Okay, Diane, you have your hand up.
Well, one last question. If there was something we would want to take action about with this, is that I found it really hard to find what rules we're actually applying, because on the CDC site, it says one thing. On the county site, it says something else. So if anything, I would argue that we should have a more clear line of communication about when these things are lifted, because you've got the stay-at-home order that supersedes, and it's hard to tell if I were a church, which ones would be applying at any one time. So we maybe could go back to doing indoors sooner. They may not even know it because they're looking at the wrong stuff. It's really hard to find. I tried to look it up.
Yeah.
And the county was very clear.
Also, the counties, we're straddling San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. Like I say, when I was growing up in Palo Alto, well, we went to Santa Clara County, but I mean, it was just across the street practically. So, I mean, I think Diana makes a good point about that. And I guess we could take a vote, call for a motion, two different kinds, first, up or down to even send a letter at all. And then we could talk about modifying it. So would anyone like to make a motion to send the letter?
Well, I'll do that. I'd like to send a letter, and I think based on the comments today that we should have it modified by George. So send a modified letter. Is
there a second?
Yeah, I'd second that.
Okay, second by Mike. All in favor?
I'll do a roll call, Mayor, with your permission.
Okay.
Councilmember Hawkins, Manuelian.
So am I saying in favor or not in favor? I'm not in favor.
Okay. Councilmember DeGolia.
I'm in favor if it's changed and comes back for reapproval.
And so the motion on the floor is for the letter to be modified by City Manager Rodericks. And then are we going to say, would we like to amend that the modification would then come back to council?
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment that it will come back to council for reapproval.
And would that, okay, so can we say that Widmer and Lempers would you guys both support that with your initial motion and second?
I thought that's what it was. So.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear so that we don't have it too confusing. Next, we're going to go with Councilmember Widmer.
yes.
Vice Mayor Lempres.
Aye.
And Mayor Lewis.
I don't agree. I have to tell you, I don't agree because I think whatever letter comes back is not going to be approved unless it is absolutely just something that says we support freedom of worship. Because if it has anything to do with COVID or, modifying existing entry guidelines, it goes way beyond our authority to even do something like that. So I'm going to say no.
Thank you. It's a 3-2 vote. Motion passes.
Mhm. Okay, let's move on to item number 5. Discussion and direction regarding the start time for city council meetings. I'll let George take this. This was something that was brought up by our new council member, Diana Manuelian Hawkins Manuelian. I've got to get that right one of these days.
You guys can call me Hawkins if you prefer it shorter. That would be easy.
I like Manuelian. I have to get my mouth around it.
It's very
Okay,
Game of
I
Thrones.
answer to anything, and Diana is fine too.
All right, George, you want to just tee this up real quickly? You did a great job with the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. This item is, as you mentioned, a discussion and direction regarding start time of council meetings. The council's had this conversation before, back in 2017, I believe, where we talked about the setting of study sessions. And there was also some conversation over the course of these years about the start times and end times of council meetings. So the council's free to discuss that this evening. Study sessions are held on the first Wednesday from 4 to 6. We try to limit the items on the agenda, but sometimes things get added and the agendas get tight, but we try to restrict it to 2 hours. And study sessions are canceled if there's no items to discuss. Regular meetings are held on the third Wednesday of each month, beginning at 7. Closed sessions are usually in advance of those. We've got a closed session on January 20th. That'll start about 6:15 p.m. There's no prescribed end time for regular meetings. They can go on for that rest of that evening and sometimes into the next morning, and they have. The council is typically dark during the month of August. Special meetings are to be limited based on occurrence and need, and meetings can be adjusted if they're impacted due to holidays. That's the current policy setting, but the council is free to amend that as needed. If we do change the start time of council meetings or the days of the week, we need to adopt a resolution to do that, and that would come back at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. So are there any clarifying questions from any of our council members at this point for George or staff? Okay, seeing none, are there any public comments or questions?
And I have none, Mayor.
Okay, let's bring it back to council. Diana, you're the one that brought this up, so let's talk about why you think we need to do and what would be your suggestions.
I would like to suggest that we start a little bit earlier and maybe set a cap time at the end, because before I was on, I watched some of the sessions and they went, I don't know, it felt like it was almost midnight and people started dropping off. And when an important item gets brought up toward the end, some of the council members had dropped off, and certainly the public had dropped off. So I think in serving both our ability to be alert, and I'll speak for myself, I get tired. So I am much more alert if and able to address things if we started earlier and ended a little bit earlier.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment about this? Personal experiences? Councilmember Widmer, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think that it had been suggested a couple of years ago by Rick that we try to keep things ending by 10 o'clock. I fully support having a cap, and requesting also that staff put important items earlier in the meeting, because you do make better decisions when you're not tired. And if we have a study session or a closed session before, and then it's at the end of things, I just think that most of us are trying to understand what's going on and give a proper vote, but we also want the meeting to end. So I appreciate a cap, whether we start early or enough. I'm not necessarily in favor of starting early unless it's like a 6 o'clock, because that doesn't give us time really to grab something to eat and have a closed session before that.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Councilmember Widmer. Anyone else? Councilmember, let me see, DeGoya? Yeah, he's got his hand up. I can see him now.
Yeah, I think I'm glad this has come up. I also get tired, and I did observe during the last year, where I was very focused on the issue since I was the mayor, that there were members of the council that dropped off as things got late. I've often felt that and the meetings went late. And I worked really hard to try to get meetings to end by 10 o'clock. It's harder to make that happen on Zoom than it is in person. And I wasn't able to manage it a couple times during the year, and meetings did go late. But my concern with setting a shutoff time is that then we end up having issues that get rolled over to the next meeting. And my fear is that the agenda will just get increasingly unmanageable. My strong preference would be to start at 6 o'clock. I think we set it at 7 so that people could come home from work, have dinner, and then come to the meetings. Now that all of our meetings are on Zoom, it will be much easier to start at 6 o'clock, and we could use it as a test. And then once we come off of this situation where we go back to regular meetings, we can reassess it. But I would prefer us to start at 6.
Thank you. Thank you. Council Member, Vice Mayor Lembris, hi.
Oh, there you go. I agree with what Rick said at the end there, which is I wouldn't oppose a test where we do it during COVID or during Zoom meetings, however you want to phrase it, whenever we're doing a Zoom meeting. I have a big concern though, whenever we return to traditional work schedules, because it's very, very hard to have a job and do this council service as well. And I think that if we start at 6, it's going to become all that much harder. And I think we'll then end up with a council that's full of people who either don't need to work or are retired, for whatever reason they're not working. And I don't think that's healthy. I think it's good to have people who are currently still working. And I'm just thinking, I know that typically I come home from work up in the city, and getting here by 6 means I'm leaving my office at 4, and that's not a deal breaker. But when I'm also leaving, to be at the study sessions at 4 o'clock, means I'm leaving the office at 2. And when I'm, doing other things, committee meetings and such, that I think it's a challenge. Having said that, right now I don't have that issue. But I am, like Rick said, I'm Zooming from home, and I could certainly be here at 6. So I think maybe an experiment, but I am concerned about doing it when commute hours return.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So my experience is when I came on council in 2008, the meetings would go until 12:30, 1 o'clock. I think there was a meeting one time at 1:30, and one of the council members' wives showed up to see where he was. Is he still there? Oh my gosh. He didn't go to the bar or something. I thought that was pretty funny. And you're right. I mean, it was like a marathon. It was just terrible. I agree. CCAG brings their meetings up to 6:30, which seems to be a little compromise. And they typically have some food for everybody on a buffet, but so 6:30, and then they try to finish by 8:30, 9 o'clock at the latest. And if it's going to go past 9 o'clock, they have to have they have to have everybody agree that they're going to continue the discussion for that extended period. The other element is to make sure that we are efficient with our agenda, that we put things on the consent calendar that are clearly a consent viable, that we're briefed about that, and not pack the agenda so tightly. The other option is that we hold additional meetings. And that has happened over the years in my experience also. If we just have so much that we have to get done, and you can't get it done within that 10 o'clock, 10:30 time frame, then you hold a special meeting within the next day or 2, and you finish up the work you have to do. So I'm all for doing a test starting it at 6 o'clock, if that was the magic time for everyone, and with the anticipation that we will end no later than 10 o'clock or 10:30. Any public comment on this? I already asked that, didn't I?
Hey, Elizabeth, what do we do about closed session items? Would we start those before 6? So we'd be starting at 5 or 5:15 on occasion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because the closed session items can sometimes get very lengthy, especially during labor negotiations and things like that, where we have to really analyze and discuss all of that. So,
Madam Mayor,
yes.
closed session items don't have to be at the beginning of the meeting. So if there is an earlier meeting and there's a time constraint, we can move closed session items to the end of the meeting so that the public portion of the meeting ends at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, but the council still hangs around for the closed session afterwards.
Good idea. Anybody have a comment about that? Okay. I guess we need to make a motion. I mean,
Provide some, we're just looking for some direction. If the council wants to do a test and change it to 6 o'clock, we can bring a resolution back at a future meeting to do that and tentatively set them up for 6 p.m. We need to set them up for a specific time so that they're regular meetings and not special meetings.
Yes.
There are certain things that have to be at a regular meeting of the council, so that causes some issues if we don't do that.
Okay, does that sound okay with everyone, that we head towards that? It won't be for next Wednesday, would it?
No.
No, because that's already in motion. It would start like in February.
Correct.
Is that okay?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that.
Oh, we don't need a motion. We just need
Some
direction.
direction. Unless
Yeah,
there's
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
Yeah, let's try it.
Well, let's try it until we get off of Zoom. By the time we're getting off of Zoom, then we need to take another
Okay.
vote.
So
Yeah,
I'd like to move
I agree with
on.
that.
I'd like to move on, because we really are getting behind the power curve here, because we do have
By way of example.
as an example. Okay, I'm going to move this on. Okay, item number 6 has to do with our landscape screening, hillside landscape screening. And is Stephanie here, or Sally?
Yes. Hello, Mayor. Stephanie Davis here, and Sally is here as well. I will give a really brief overview of the staff report that was prepared. So tonight this evening is a discussion and request for direction from the council regarding the town's landscape screening ordinance regulations and potential future municipal code amendments specifically related to screening of detached buildings on hillside lots. So why we're here, this issue was raised to staff as well as to a few council members back in 2019. There were concerns expressed from neighbors who lived on downsloped or lower elevation lots, and the visual impacts that their upslope neighbors were creating with the construction of new detached accessory buildings or structures. So if they were down here and the building was up here, it may visually appear taller than the town's allowable height maximum of 15 feet. So the town's current municipal code regulations regarding landscape screening do require such screening for newly constructed buildings, but there are no specifications or differences in those regulations for a hillside versus a flat lot. What happens is that the town arborist assesses each landscape screening plan on a case-by-case property-specific basis, taking into account the height of the building, the location of other adjacent buildings, other existing landscaping, and any other physical conditions of both the development property and the neighboring properties in which the landscape screening is intended to provide that visual buffer of. So the issue of any potential changes to the municipal code to address the issue could be tackled in several different ways. There could be the development of new or enhanced staff level criteria that is specific to hillside lots and mitigating criteria to address the issue for downslope neighbors having to look up at newly constructed buildings. Those, of course, will vary and should be assessed on individual bases, depending on the topography and other existing conditions that may be already there. There could be other specific ordinance requirements outside the landscape screening regulations that pertain to the construction of the building themselves. So such things as development regulations, such as height and or setbacks. With that said, there would or could be consideration for developing some type of defined criteria as to when those types of potential new regulations would be applied. So we'd need to somehow define and or map out those properties within town that would be subject to these enhanced regulations pertaining to either landscape and or whatever the other development regulations may be. It is important to note that regardless of whatever direction the council takes, if it does take a direction in evaluating amendments to the municipal code, that any such amendments would not be able to be pertained to the construction of new accessory dwelling units or ADUs, as the state law would trump such regulation, so long as that regulation does not provide any additional onus or hurdle on a developer trying or a property owner trying to construct an ADU. So the ADU needs to be able to be constructed without having additional landscape screening requirements that would otherwise prohibit it. So any amendment language would need to carefully consider that as well. So as I mentioned, the town arborist, Sally, is here. She, in her professional opinion, as it relates to landscape screening, has some thoughts as well on the ability for trees and or shrubs to adequately screen a building at a higher elevation at a 10-foot setback, just given the realistic amount of planting space and types of trees and or shrubs that would grow tall enough to screen such buildings or structures.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any clarifying questions from any member of the council for Stephanie or Sally at this point?
I do have a question, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Mhm.
I'm remembering we discussed this before, and I guess my question is are people, mostly residents, concerned about their neighbors viewing in? I understand that. Are there any other concerns that are just aesthetic, or is it all about privacy?
Aesthetic and privacy were the primary concerns that have been expressed to staff.
Okay.
And one was with lighting as well.
Councilmember Widmer, did you have a question?
Yeah, what about lighting? I know that the Goodmans came and spoke about lighting as well, because on the back of their pool house that's up the hill, it lights up their whole backyard, even though it's downspout. It's downward focus, but it's so bright it lights up their whole yard. And they brought that up when they were at the council
Stephanie,
meeting.
do you have a response to that?
Yes, I apologize. I would have categorized lighting within the aesthetic. So the visual impact that a building has, its lighting, its mass, its bulk, its windows, its color, all of those components.
Any other council member have a question for Stephanie?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Councilmember DeGolia.
Stephanie, I have two questions. One is, I see in your report at the top of page 2, it talks about screening requirements and that the town arborist receives complaints, and that basically there are certain requirements for planning, and that the selected plantings need to adequately screen the property within 5 years from the date that the permit is issued. My question is, well, what if they don't? Is there any recourse to come back and require additional screening if the approved screening proves to be inadequate after the 5-year period?
Good question.
Thank you, Councilmember DeGolia. My answer to that question is yes, but Sally, if you could chime in and give some description on some real world examples when that may have happened if a landscape maintenance agreement is not fulfilled by a project applicant.
So it hasn't happened yet in my time with the town where it hasn't been adequate after 5 years or somebody has complained about it. But I do know if you remove your screening after the construction project or alter it in some way or it dies, code enforcement can be involved to have you replace it. Because when you get your building department building permit, you sign a form that says you will keep up screening while the structure is there. So that would be a code enforcement issue.
Okay, great. Thank you. That answers the question. My second question was, in the first full paragraph on the second page, you go into quite a bit of detail on what the average natural grade is. And it's clear from, and I think what you've said is quite clear. And it is clear to me that there's no difference for what the average natural grade is for a home that is on a slope versus one that isn't, and that's part of where the problem is. So my question is that something that we could adjust? Now, I understand that adjusting it would necessitate, if we're going to adjust it for hillside properties, it would necessitate a definition of what a hillside property is. But the question is the average natural grade one of the things that we could address in seeking to deal with this issue?
It certainly could be. It would fall back into the development regulation of how the town calculates height. So the definition that I put in the staff report, as you mentioned, is applicable to any and all property within town. So how a building height is measured in some future defined hillside lot could certainly be evaluated as a potential mitigating solution.
All right. Anything else, Councilmember DeGolia?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Councilmember Diana?
I don't have any comments on this.
Okay, all right. So I guess my comments are similar in line with what Rick was, I think, getting at. It just seems to me, and I want to ask the question about the limits on the ADU, like restrictions on constructing an ADU from the state. If there were, if it was proven that constructing an ADU within the 10-foot setback would seem looming, like higher than what a normal building, adjacent building would be, could we not require that ADU to be pushed back into the building envelope, the property, so that it's not as looming and it's not as intrusive?
So the ADU requirements actually allow a detached ADU to be constructed up to a maximum height of 16 feet versus 15 feet as the town's standard regulation. But what it doesn't do is give a subsequent definition of how to measure height. So Mona, please chime in and correct me if I'm mistaken. I would say that if, for example, the direction was for the town to consider possible amendments on how to measure building height on sloped lots, that such measurement language would still need to allow a detached ADU to be constructed up to a maximum height of 16 feet at its allowable per state guidelines. So we'd have to carefully consider how that language read as it would be applied to the 16-foot height maximum for an ADU.
Understand. Okay. So Councilmember DeGoya, you have your hand up one more time.
Yeah, but I didn't realize we were in comments. So,
No, that was a question. We weren't in comments.
oh,
You didn't hear me ask a question?
no, I heard you make a comment, but I'm
So
patient.
you're commenting now?
I'm very patient.
You're patient. No, you're not. Okay. So, so the other question is pertaining to the ADU, so that they would have to do the 16-foot. So could there be restrictions on border lighting situation on that side of the property facing the downhill slope lighting?
As it relates specifically to ADUs or any detached accessory building or structure?
Well, I guess my question has to do with, how much leeway do we have with regulating ADUs? Because that seemed to be something that we really couldn't play around with much.
I think the short answer is not much, if very little to at all. So
That's, just to interject really quickly, we have strict limitations on construction setback heights, but we do have significant flexibility with things like lighting. And we would, as long as we are not treating ADUs differently than other types of structures. And we cannot impose any kind of limitation that would prevent or make it more difficult for an ADU to be constructed. So I would feel much more comfortable about regulating lighting for an ADU as compared to setbacks or height limitations. I would advise not to regulate those.
Okay. All right.
May I ask Mona a quick question?
Okay. Yeah, we're still in question period.
Yeah, it is a question. It is a question to Mona. What about windows? Could you say no windows on the back side, on the, facing the downhill slope? Can we do that both for ADUs? I know we can do it for pool houses, but ADUs, for example.
I think it would depend on whether the restriction on the windows would make the construction of the ADU infeasible. So in other words, so that's kind of a topography question. If the ADU would be situated on a property where all of the other windows, there's ample room and ability for other sides of the ADU to have windows, and just limiting one side doesn't materially affect the others, I think that would be fine. So my answer is it depends.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So are there any public comments on this? Any members of the public?
I don't have any hands raised, and
Okay.
I don't believe that we have any members on the
Bring
call.
it back to council for comments. And I think Councilmember DeGoya has his hand up first.
Okay. Well, I think that we need to do something for hillside properties. I think that the example in the staff report is very clear. If you have a property that is built, whether it's 5 feet as an ADU or 10 feet from the property line, as our regulations currently allow an accessory building to be on a side or back property line, that if that property line is sloped, then that property can feel much more imposing, and I think that there's two solutions to that. Either we reduce the increase the setback and move the building away from the property line, which we can't do with the ADU, as I understand it, and I have a question on that I'll come back to, or we raise the fence. And but I think that we have to be able to give those downhill people privacy. And I'm happy to have staff give us suggestions if the rest of the council agrees that this is action that we need to take. I guess, in terms of time management, it would be great to refer this back to staff, and I'm perfectly comfortable to refer it to the Planning Commission if the rest of the council would like to do that. But I'd like to get some recommendations from staff on what they think are the best ways to do it. I do have one question, which goes to Mona, and I fully understand the regulations around the ADU, and I understand the 5 foot. The comment that Stephanie made raises a question in my mind, which is, how do you measure 5 feet? And if you measure 5 feet differently when you're on a sloped average natural grade than a flat natural grade, if we can do that within the context of the California regulations on ADUs, then I think that's something we should look at.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Widmer, you have your hand waving at me.
Yeah, so sorry, I wasn't meaning to wave, just.
Hi.
Hi, okay, so I believe we need to do something. We need to have something in our provisions that say, a specific grade. If the grade is more than so many feet, we should restrict windows, we should restrict lighting on the backside. And I think we need to address the screening issue. Now, the screening can be, a large fence or something that's higher than what our normal limitations are. Or we can have something such as you have to plant the tree and then a bush between the trees. So the bushes will cover up where they grow up to where the canopy is, and the canopy will be taller. So, I think that there's several things that we could do here. But I went through the ordinances with George, gave him my comments on those, but I do think that it needs to be changed to address this.
Thank you. Okay. Other council members want to weigh in on this. Vice Mayor Lempres?
Yeah, I agree that we should do something, and that it's a good idea to defer it to refer it rather to staff to come back. I would just ask, and I agree with everything that's been said actually up to this point. I would ask that staff, though, in doing this, consider ways to reach our goals that reinforce what I think has been strengths of the town, which involve things like we are pretty clear about what's allowed and what's not, and we are not a town where people get caught up with 6 months or a year of design review. And so I think we should try to make the rules clear, whatever they are. But again, I'll refer to the staff. They know how to do that. And I have no particular wisdom beyond that.
Appreciate your comment. Keep our corporate culture as it is with no design review. Councilmember Diana. Unmute.
I think we should create a category based on the slope of the property. And I agree with Mike that it should be delineated. So it's not something we're debating endlessly.
Yeah. Okay. So George, did you have enough direction from council at this point?
Just one point of clarity. The typical process is, this is a land use ordinance revision that it goes through the Planning Commission before it makes its way back up to the council. So just confirming that that's the direction the council's providing tonight.
Yeah, Planning Commission doesn't have much else on their plate right now, like rewriting the whole, municipal code like they did before. But I just want to make a comment, and I know that the 1 or 2 resident complaints, that means a lot to them. It's got to mean a lot to us, but it's not that like we have been getting a multitude of complaints over the years about this. But I think that as more development is continuing to be made up in the hill area of our town, that we need to have more specific guidelines. So I'm definitely in favor of doing that. Is that okay? Okay. let's move on. Thank you, George. Thank you, Stephanie, very much. And Sally. So item number 7, we have our Chief of Police here with us. Hello, Chief McCulley. How are you?
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. You've got a big agenda item. It could have been, I think we could have made 3 or 4 different topics here, but I'll let you start off and kind of guide us through it.
Well, I'll let you know that Robert Barron tried to talk me into a 50 PowerPoint slide presentation. But I said no.
He loves those PowerPoints.
Does.
Yeah.
So I do know I have 4 reports, and I appreciate your time, and I do plan to be brief but thorough. And just to tee it up a little bit for these 4 requests, I do believe that our department's very progressive, and that in order to be relevant and maintain relevancy, you got to look down the road 1 mile, 3 miles, and 5 miles. And we've been doing that over the last year internally with our staff to make sure that we're always meeting the critical needs of staff, so that we in turn can be making sure that we're meeting the needs of our residents and providing the best service. And I do believe that these 4 recommendations before you do that. And with that, I'll start with the first one. And what I'd like to do, if it works for all of you, is I'll go through each one, question and answers, and I'll move on to the other. Does that work, Mayor?
Yes, that sounds good.
All right, so the first one I have is looking for authorization to add especially a motorcycle position, traffic sergeant, back to the department. We had one years ago. It went away, I think, due to lack of interest, maybe from some of our writers. Our motorcycle program right now consists of 2 full-time motorcycle officers and a part-time reserve officer who works about 3 days a week. Gives us very good coverage. And in looking at this position, I remember during my hiring process, and since one of the big major complaints, as we all know, is traffic issues in town. And in response to comments received for the comprehensive traffic management plan, again, it came up about traffic, speeding traffic, cut through traffic. So when we looked at our inventory, and we realized that if we have Sergeant David Metzger now, who, if you all remember, had been a motor officer for some time. He's very talented, very experienced. It would be an easy lift to assign him to this position. And we've also received a very generous donation from a resident, once again, $45,000 to purchase the motorcycle. And what that would allow us to have is motorcycle coverage, not only during the week, but during the weekend, for a total of 4 motorcycle officers. There is a 5% specialty pay that goes with that position. And additionally, the motor sergeant, traffic sergeant would be responsible for the coordination of the training and other elements of our traffic division. And the amount, fiscally impact to that annually would be around $8,000. Yes, Mr. Widmer.
Since Dave Metzger was a motor officer before, didn't he already get the 5%? Isn't he already on that 5%? Or when he stopped driving the motorcycle, did he lose that? Did he have a decrease in pay?
That's correct. When he was promoted to sergeant, the 5% pay went away.
Okay, and secondly, can you buy an electric motorcycle? Because actually our neighbors next door have one, and it seems to be good. If you could investigate that, I think that would be a step in a good direction.
I have done some work on that, and one of our officers who used to work for Menlo and came back actually had some experience with that motorcycle. And in talking with some of our other folks, the cons pretty much outweighed the pros. Harley Davidson offers an electric motorcycle right now, but not a police model, as does BMW. The one that Menlo has, and I don't even believe they're utilizing it anymore, I can verify that. Just from a safety perspective, and one of the main points with that is to have 3 officers on a BMW and 1 on an electric bike to move back and forth. It's quite a training issue because there's a lot of differences in the bike. My recommendation would be to maintain uniformity and stick with the BMWs that are in our fleet.
Okay, so Chief, are you ready for questions now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'll open it up for questions from other members of the council. Vice Mayor Lumpers?
Yeah, I do have a question. And Chief, just on the $45,000 dollar donation, can you just give us a little more background on that? How did that come about? And is it specifically for a motorcycle? Can you just talk to us about that?
Yeah, interesting story. I don't want you to get the sense that, we went out soliciting a motorcycle before we even came before you, but Officer Boyle, who many of you know, is very gregarious and always out and about in town. He was flagged down by the person who I know you're familiar with that donated the money, just to chat, see how things are going. And she asked him, which is not uncommon for her to ask, is there anything the police department needs? And he was aware that we were working on this project, and he did indicate we could possibly use an additional motorcycle. So she contacted the commander the next day and delivered a check for that.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, Mike?
Not of the chief, but at some point I'd like a larger brief on donations to the police department. I think they're great, but we get them haphazard.
Okay, all right. Any other council member? I see Rick, Councilmember DeGoya has his hand up. Question?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. Chief, under fiscal impact on this, there's a discussion that the step E salary for sergeant is $13,287, and the incentive pay for the motor officer is 5%. And it says this is an increase of $664 to step E. The total monthly cost for the specialty position is $13,951 per year. And I just didn't understand if that $13,951 is a monthly cost, which is how it's introduced, or if it's an annual cost.
No, it would be annual. The figure I have, annualized figure, is 8,000. Robert, did we miss something on that?
No, it's actually the 13,287 plus 664 is the 13,951. So the total salary per month.
So that's a monthly salary, and the fiscal impact of the change to make him a motor officer is the 5%, which is 7,968. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. That makes sense.
That's good. Okay. Councilmember Diana.
I have a question. Do we have any state requirement to transition to electronic fleet? And do we have any numbers that we have to reach in terms of getting our fleet of vehicles to be electric?
I am not aware of that. I know that there's a county initiative program to encourage that. Currently, we only have one vehicle it's a hybrid vehicle. It's not totally electric in our fleet.
There's a consistent challenge with electric pursuit rated vehicles for police. For normal town operations, yes, they're within the town's climate action plan. There is a local directive to move toward electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, but within the police fleet, it's a little more challenging to identify those types of vehicles that meet the state requirements.
Thank you. Any other council members? My question got answered, the fiscal impact, because it was confusing to me. I was calculating the 13,951 times 12 as the fiscal impact, and didn't come out, but there you go. Okay, any members of the public have any questions? See none?
None, Mayor.
Okay, comments from the council, Councilmember Widmer, and then Councilmember DeGoya.
So, Chief, and George, I'm supportive of this. I think it's a good move. I do understand from my work in the trash board is that by 2030, we need to have a certain percentage of our fleet transition to electric. Now, how we cover that police-wise, I'm not sure, but there is a time frame and a percentage out there I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councilmember DeGoya?
I think this is an important thing to do. I like the idea of adding another motor officer. I think that we need more enforcement on the roads. We know from the traffic review that we've done that speeding is probably the highest concern that our residents have. I think putting another motorcycle into play makes lots and lots of sense. I am thrilled that we have a donation for that motorcycle. I think Sergeant Metzger would be excellent on this. I think it makes all the sense in the world to have a sergeant in the motor corps. I think this is absolutely the right thing to do.
Okay, great. Councilmember Diana or Vice Mayor Lumpres?
I like the whole package. I know we're only talking about the first one, but I like the idea of creating a career path for our police.
Okay. Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I'm strong support of this issue. I think Rick phrased it well. This comes up often in traffic enforcement as a big issue with the town. It's important. The Transportation Committee comes up all the time. I think it's a helpful step in that direction and it makes good sense.
Good. I'm going to echo all my fellow council members' sentiments. George, are we going to have to do motions for every one of these, or is this staff direction?
No, it's staff direction. The last three come as part of the budget process. So if the council is supportive of it, we'll move them into the budget process. This one is part of normal operations anyway. We would just purchase the motorcycle at a point in time and then add the specialty assignment.
Good. We thank our donor very much. And so we'll move on. You ready for the next item, Chief?
I am. Thank you for the good comments. So the second one, it's authorization to overhire a police trainee position. And it's a very unique time here in the police department. I know that you read the background and the comments. So it's uncommon, and it's only happened once in my career, where we have two situations. Officer Dunphy is going to retire this March, and we know that Sergeant Cochler is going to retire in October. So knowing that, and knowing that we're trying to get to full staff, and with our recruiting, we're trying to really leverage this very unique opportunity to get us to full staffing by November of this year. We already have a conditional offer out for a police trainee now to go to the academy this April, anticipating replacing Officer Dunphy, who retires in March. But if you were to authorize this position, it allows us to send him to this recruit to the academy. He'll be ready to go for solo patrol in November. We also have a very good lateral candidate on the bench that we could hire quickly to replace Don Dunphy in March. One of the big benefits of this plan is not just getting us to full staffing, but not being at full staffing means overtime. And it's something that I'm constantly monitoring. George and I talk a lot about our overtime budget. This would enable us to be at full staffing, mitigate overtime. The cost, in my opinion, is minimal. We have the budget in our current staff to pay the monthly salary if we send the recruit in April through the end of this fiscal year. And into the next fiscal year, it would just be a one-time cost of additional $35,000 for salary to get the kid through the academy to come out in November.
Okay. Ready for questions? Who'd like to go first? Any questions for the chief at this point before we go into comments? Self-explanatory?
Also, one comment, Mayor. I know there's a question, is this going to happen every year? No. This is the first time it's come up in the 4 years I've been here. But the ability to overhire, and it certainly would never be done without, good dialogue, fiscal analysis. But it's just nice to have that opportunity if it were to come up again with notice to be able to plan ahead. If you're not familiar, it takes at least, not only the hiring process is about 3 months, it's 6 months in the academy, 3 months of training. So by taking this opportunity now with an academy date, we're able to do it. Otherwise, if we weren't able to do it, next academy could be into 2022, and it could be over a year and a half before we get somebody out on the street on solo patrol.
Okay. All right. Do we have any members of the public that would like to make a comment or question at this time?
Again, we have none, Mayor.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, who'd like to go first for comments to the chief?
I'll go.
We'll let Councilmember DeGoya go first this time, Mr. Widmer. Go ahead.
Just first a clarification. I assume that once we make an offer to someone going through the academy, Chief, that they go on, if they accept, and do they then go on salary while they are in the academy?
Yes, they do. I believe the salary is 7,000 something a month.
But they're not a sworn officer.
No,
So they're not in the higher level pension obligation as a sworn officer. They're in the local miscellaneous class.
I see.
Yeah, and so that's why the three times 7 is 21, but it's 7,000 something because that's the 35,000, right?
Oh,
right.
So I thought the staff report was pretty clear on this. I think where the critical issue is we have a pending vacancy and we're aware of it. I mean, there's many times I'm sure that we would have a pending vacancy and not be aware of it. But if we're aware of a pending vacancy, we should make the offer. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to make whatever changes, policy changes we need to make to authorize staff to proceed. That where they know there's going to be a vacancy, that they are authorized to make an offer to fill that vacancy. And the timing situation with the academy is perfectly clear that if we don't make it and somebody has to go through the academy rather than it be a lateral hire, then we may lose a year. And I'd much rather have the department at full complement and take the risk of a cost of some $30,000 to have that. I think if we know there's going to be a vacancy, we should make the offer.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Widmer.
Sure. First off, I think this is a great idea. Our neighbors actually fund people going through the academy. And I think that oftentimes, as we found out in the years past, that, somebody has to go on disability. And if we don't have somebody to come in and take their place, then it's a problem. So I think it should be, a situation where, when we know what this is happening or somebody's been hurt, that we go ahead and move forward. And if we have to, like our neighbors fund people to go to the academy, I think that that's a smart move so we can get the people that we want, because in the past we haven't been able to.
Thank you. Councilmember Diana.
I think it's a clever way to make sure that we have people when we need them in this kind of a situation. I am surprised though that being an Atherton policeman wouldn't be considered a posh job, that we don't have a lot of people, a lot of other police that already been through the academy that are dying to come here. But that being said, if you have someone that's really good, I think this is a clever way to make sure the position's filled.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Lempres.
I'm supportive.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say I support this also. I as a business owner, recruiting and hiring good employees is really a full-time job. I mean, you're always out on the hunt, and and you never know when you're going to need them. But I think we're in kind of a unique situation right here that we know ahead of time, and there are going to be times, and so what we're doing is only authorizing it as for this one time only. But then if something else comes up, like next year, if we know about it, we'll come back to council and reauthorize this, or is this a policy change we're going to be making that would be just automatically renewed?
As Councilmember DeGolia indicated, I think he was moving in the direction as to make that call as we go forward as a policy change overall to give us that authority. I've always been hesitant to do it.
Yeah.
And the reason is if we put somebody through the academy just as a regular basis without a known vacancy, then we run into the position of having an extra officer on staff that we're not authorized to have.
Right.
and with a commitment. Or if we were to put somebody through the academy on the basis of somebody walking into the chief's office and saying, you know, I think I'm going to retire in March, and then they change their mind and don't issue a resignation or a letter of retirement, we had that same problem as well. So we're going to be very careful in using it, as it's not just going to be a blanket approach to be able to run people through the academy like larger organizations can. They always have a larger vacancy pool. We don't. So that's kind of my take on it.
And
So it would come back to council then, if
For some
it's
feedback, yeah.
for feedback.
and George made a-
I'm more confused. I apologize, Chief. What was the answer to the mayor's question? Is this a one-off or is this a policy change?
It's a one-off.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
and
Well,
George brought
I
up a
don't
very
like-
good. Go
yeah.
ahead, Mayor. I'm sorry.
No, I don't like overtime. I mean, to the extent that we can, prevent as much overtime by preempting the vacancy situation, to the extent that you keep a good feeler out with all of your officers and employees that kind of know who's looking at retiring when and where. I think that's what management is all about. And so I think this is a smart thing to do. So I'm happy to authorize this.
And then just so you know, when someone does come in my office announcing retirement, we do get it in writing, make it as binding as possible, and let them know that what they're doing and what they're signing, because once they do that, then we do get right on the ball and get it rolling to get hiring. And there's really no going back unless there's some dramatic change.
Okay. All right. George, do you want us to make a motion on this item?
No, none of these are action items, just direction for us.
Okay, fine. Shall we move on?
On to number 3. So now this is a request to take our current dispatch lead position and turn it into a dispatch supervisor position. Just to give you a little background, we have a total of 5 dispatchers, 4 regular, 1 lead, and then we do also lean on some per diem dispatchers from other agencies. We used to have a large pool. Now we're down to about 2. And then, as a lot of you are aware, history-wise, we did have a dispatch supervisor position years ago, and then due to budget constraints, that position went away, and it was repositioned into a lead position. My experience, though, as you can imagine, currently, without a supervisor, lead position is very difficult. They're asked to do things that really are supervision, and right now, supervision for dispatch is handled by Sergeant Kokler. It's also handled by the duty sergeant for that team, and it's also handled by the commander. So it does make it difficult with consistency and messaging and supervision. It also makes it very difficult to give in-depth job performance appraisals, if that makes sense. And we also need, dispatch. I started my career as a dispatcher, and it's a very unique profession, very technical. Especially now with different requirements coming from the federal government and others. You really need to have somebody, and not a sergeant that's distanced or the commander that's busy. You need to have somebody that's focused on what needs to get done in dispatch, and also the development of the dispatchers. And again, this gives one more career opportunity within the department, which creates good morale.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from any member of the council? I see Bill Widmer. Hi, Councilmember Widmer.
Chief, is there a reason that we can't assign managing the dispatch group to just one sergeant or to the commander, so that that's the person all the time, that they know that that's part of their duty?
It's difficult because of the changing hours and shifts in their assignment. And again, we're all busy. The commander, with overall operational procedures, and then Sergeant Kokler with the administrative side of the house. It really does make sense to me to have a supervisor that's monitoring the dispatch center. And this discussion had been going on for a while, and particularly timing as well, as we're going into the new civic center, the new dispatch center that has a functional supervisor space. And just to be very clear too, probably in response to some maybe concerns in the past, this dispatch supervisor position isn't going to be somebody that's sitting in office and not involved. They're going to be an engaged supervisor, just like our patrol sergeants are. They're out there working alongside their folks. They're filling in where they need to, handling different issues that they need to.
Okay, any other questions from council? Councilmember Diana.
Are you guys hiring from within? Will you just take one of the people you currently have and based on seniority move somebody up, or are you opening a new position that you'll be getting from outside?
Good question. No, this would be an internal promotion. Because if we went outside, we'd have to, that would be number 6. So we'd have to displace. So it has to be an internal candidate. And we do have a few very good candidates internally, which is very fortunate.
Is that decision made by seniority?
No, that decision is made by the announcement is put out to the dispatchers who are interested. And then we put together a panel of some internal folks and external, and they go through an interview process.
Okay. Any other questions, Diana?
No.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, Chief, I know we're not talking about the next issue yet, but how does this relate to the next item on the agenda? And what would the dispatching unit look like if both were approved?
Well, and I guess, and we can, that's a good lead into the next one, and we'll start going on that in a minute, in a second. It just gives you capacity within the dispatch unit. And comments were made under this hybrid position that we'll be talking about in a second. I guess we'll just get into it. From a dispatch perspective, they're working 12-hour shifts. During the day, at night, it's always one person. During the day, most of the time it's one, and it's assisted by the lead. But as you can imagine, 12 hours in that stressful position, and again, I can relate because I did the work. Oftentimes, it's difficult having to find other staff to provide a bathroom break. It's become very difficult to get an actual lunch break, which we're required to give. In order to do that, we're leaning on my assistant, Jennifer Frew, sometimes Monica Diaz, Erica Johnson, who is part-time dispatcher, will fill in. But it's really not the best way to do it because it's creating impacts to all of our different operations. And I'm keenly sensitive to the fact that we have to provide a good quality of life for the dispatchers, especially now with so many conversations about officer wellness. It's really important for them to get out of dispatch, leave the building, go work out, have a lunch, have an actual break that all of us in the PD have the luxury to go do when we can and when we want to. So that's where this hybrid position from the dispatcher and the dispatch supervisor helps fill that gap.
So just so I understand, there'd be 4 full-time dispatcher positions, 1 supervisor position, and 1 hybrid position. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
So I'd like to follow on a little question from what Vice Mayor was leading up to. So at any point in that 12-hour shift, how many dispatchers, and including the lead and the code enforcement officer, would be working?
At night, depending on vacations, et cetera, you typically have 1. During the day shift, Monday through Friday, there's full-time dispatcher, supervisor would be in and out, possibly covering some shifts apparently and not doing admin work. And then the hybrid position, the beauty of that is with planning and vacations and breaks, because they're here at the building and not even per diem, we'd be able to plug them in where needed, at the same time plugging them in where needed in code enforcement.
Okay. Follow-on question. Is the nighttime 12-hour shift a rotating nighttime position, or is that typically someone who like always works nights?
It depends. It's based on seniority. So they have selections and it is rotating. It can be about a 3 or 4 month period.
Okay.
And with, just so you know, with night times and weekends, it is much quieter. And so it's much easier to work with the patrol team to have them come in at a certain time, to give that dispatcher a break, get away from the phones. They can have lunch as a group.
Okay. So
during the
patrol team?
day, it's during the weekday, it's much busier.
Got it. Okay. So I have a question on page 3 of 6 of your report under fiscal impact, because there's the first sentence that says that the fiscal year 21-22 for regular salaries anticipated at 550,000. And then it goes on and talks about other neighboring agencies, shows the following, which you do, but that's per individual position. But then the second paragraph talks about the current role of the lead dispatcher and the increase. And then it says that total salary and benefits is an additional cost increase of 24,000 to 29,000. So for the budget, that would be added to the 550,000 salary budget amount that we're talking about.
From what I understand, that's correct. And then I know it is a little confusing. We were looking at our neighboring agencies to show ranges. And if you look at the Colma range, I think that's more of a applicable range for our supervisor. And that's one of the things that have to work with George and Robert Barron and work out what would be an acceptable and fair salary.
But to be clear, we're adding a body, right?
No, we're not adding a body. We're merely, the lead position would go away, be replaced with the supervisor. So we're not adding a body, we're just adding.
And then increasing the salary.
To be commensurate with being a supervisor, correct.
Okay, so how are we better?
By having the supervisor?
Yeah.
Well, there's so many different operations within the dispatch center. So if you can imagine, first off, job performance evaluations, which are very important. They're very important for future promotion, etc. You need to have one person who intimately knows the work. So right now, a dispatch supervisor evaluation would be part conducted by the sergeant that's on their team, part conducted by Anthony Kokler, maybe part by the commander, or all have different pieces ongoing. So one of the main portions of the supervisor is fair and detailed evaluations. Secondly, they become the subject matter and technology experts working within dispatch to make sure that we're meeting FBI, California DOJ requirements. And you need somebody that's on the ball, and not to say that the commander can't do it or Anthony Kokler can't do it, but it's much better to have an actual supervisor there. And also too, uniformity and consistency and accountability. I've never worked with or been with a dispatch center where there isn't supervisor or manager and supervisors. It's a very common working model.
So essentially, we're taking one of our dispatchers full-time and promoting them to a supervisory position, giving them an increase in salary because we're going to give them more work to do.
Correct.
They'll still be doing dispatch. They'll still be doing all the other stuff that needs to be done, that is being done now.
Correct.
Okay. So that's all my questions. Open it up to any, I have City Manager Rodrigues. You have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you. Just a couple of, well, one point and one question. The dispatch center works 24/7, just like the police officers do. So in order to cover all 168 hours of that 24/7, it requires a minimum of 5 personnel just to meet the 168 hours per week. So that's why we have the 5 dispatchers. So it's not like we've got a couple of them going on at a time. There's only one really that will rotate through and cover shifts or be an additional dispatcher when needed. 5 people need to work that dispatch center in order to make it work for 24/7. And Chief, what is Sergeant Kokler's main duty and responsibility?
He's our investigations supervisor, and he also oversees code enforcement and our court officer.
So he's been rather busy of late dealing with the burglaries.
Yeah, and it's also difficult. He does a very good job, super dedicated. I wish I had another one. But code enforcement obviously is extremely busy, as is the court officer, but especially now with our burglary investigations and others, how in depth that is. it's very easy to, obviously that's the priority. He's got to focus on that. So you can imagine things in dispatch, things can go by the wayside. And I've learned from experience, small things become big things if they're not addressed, and you got to have your eye on the ball on all parts of this operation.
Okay, all right. Did we open it up for any public comments? So any other comments from council members about this promotion of a dispatcher with an increase in salary for additional responsibilities? And I see Councilmember DeGolia had his hand up.
Yes, I think this is a good move. I had a lengthy conversation with the city manager about this, and I think I fully understand it. We're moving what has been a rotation of the lead supervisor amongst the current dispatchers. One person was on lead for a short time, and then it rotated to another. And we're promoting someone to be a communication supervisor in place of that rotation lead. I think that's an excellent idea. And I think it's important to do it. I think given our situation that we don't need to set this salary anywhere other than where Colma has theirs. And I would recommend that we use the $113 to $126 amount that Colma has as our basis. But I think it's a great move, and I support it 100%.
Councilmember Diana.
I think that it's a good idea as well, but I just have one question. If you have 4 people right now that are taking turns having that responsibility, and now you're going to pick one to promote, will that create a morale problem with the other 3 or 4 that somehow now don't get to be a lead anymore?
That's a good question, and I don't think it will. It does rotate, and sometimes we struggle to find somebody that wants to be the lead, because as you all know, once you become the boss, it does create another level of headaches. That's why we do give them increased compensation. I'm not sure how many would be interested in the dispatch supervisor position. But it's a very good question, but I don't think it would. You have the opportunity to put in for the position. I think they're going to like the sustainability of that position and the uniformity that it provides to them. Also, a better look at career development for each of them.
Okay. Vice Mayor, did you want to weigh in on this?
Only to say that I'm deferring to the recommendation of the city manager and the chief. I don't see this as quite as strong an easy decision as the others in the council do, but I think that we've got good management in place and they're recommending it, and I'm happy to refer to them.
Okay. I think we've heard from Councilmember Widmer. Yes.
Yeah. So one question, Chief, and it combines both of this and the next one. With the way we're going, which I support both of them, but you do have 2 part-time dispatchers. Are we going to lose any of those, or are you going to keep those as well? So when we talk about what we have permanently, there are 2 others that are part-time, as I understand, talking to George.
No, I do plan to keep them. We actually have 3, one of our previous dispatchers who left for Google, but she still participates. No, we fully would intend, just like a reserve officer, it's great to have that capacity in your back pocket in case you need it for particular reasons.
They're not paid, Chief, they're not regularly scheduled positions that come in 2 days a week or 3 days a week.
No, it's all done with planning and where the vacancies are.
Okay. All right. I too am supportive of this. It's not as compelling as the other ones, but I think that the additional salary of, around that 24,000, 25,000 additional a year for additional responsibility. And I hope that you are able to, choose correctly on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see, shall we go on to the last one?
So the last one, it's unique, and I'm very sensitive. I know that it's, adding a position is sensitive and it's a heavier lift. But we did a deep dive here looking at multiple facets, and I will, if you want to blame anybody, or I'll give credit to the commander who came up with this idea. And when he first came up with it, I thought he was joking. As you all know, he likes to joke, but he wasn't. And when we really took a look at it, it started to make a lot of sense, especially as we worked with our dispatch people and code enforcement. As you know, Atherton is very unique in so many ways. And it took me a while to grasp the uniqueness and the impacts of code enforcement here in town. If you look at 200 to 300 large construction projects that go on for 2 or 3 years, you're looking at a lot of quality of life issues and a lot of code enforcement issues. I am a firm believer that, a response by, we're blessed to have Monica Diaz, very professional, very dedicated, does a great job. I think it's great to have the ability to have a civilian go out, not a police officer with a gun, and deal with these issues up front before they come law enforcement issues, because some of them have. Also, too, there's so much capacity in one person. And when we really had a detailed discussion with Monica, making sure that, every efficiency is built in, there's only so much capacity in one person. And quite often it's more than she can handle, but it isn't another full-time position to do it, much like dispatch. And so the beauty of the hybrid position would be that they would be able to fill in with scheduling, with code enforcement. And I think get us to the balance. I think from council, I've heard different things, and I know where you want to go, is being just reactive. We don't want to be too heavy-handed and proactive. My belief is there's a balance in there, because if you're just reactive, things can build. And if you don't see things, little things again become big things. And if you're proactive, you can deal with these things and stamp out the fire before they become big things. And eventually word gets around town that, they're out there, they're watching, and they're looking. And then for dispatch, again, getting back to making sure that we got a good quality of life in dispatch. We're looking at dispatcher wellness. They're able to come in during the work week, provide that lunch break, additional breaks, and then with planning, make sure that we're plugging back on both sides of the house. So I thought it was a really interesting concept, and I think it's something that would work very well. And of course, the main justification isn't for career advancement, but it does give us another element of career advancement within the department for a position that I think we need to make sure that we're efficient within code enforcement and dispatch.
Okay, thank you. City manager would like to add something.
Yes, thank you. Chief, could you also elaborate on what Monica's hours are? I think there's a need here that Monica works a 410, I believe.
She does. She works, it's either Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday. So there's one day that she's off. It's that one day where the emails and other things start to pile up. And a lot of these things, officers could go out, and just so you're clear, nights, weekends, and other times when officers do see an ordinance violation, they're instructed and they're trained. They stop, they get all the necessary information, and it's forwarded to code enforcement to ensure that it's handled properly. And that's worked out well as well. But again, there's so much of Monica. So the hybrid position would be allowed to fill in that open day, and then also assist Monica with enforcement, data gathering, all aspects of code enforcement.
But not just that singular open day. This particular individual could also be scheduled to cover weekends or other times as needed, particularly when we have weekend construction activity that occurs or evening construction hour activity that occurs. That is a huge quality of life issue for this community.
No, and that's an absolutely good question, because it would be part of the job description that they would have to be open to or willing to or be able to be assigned as needed in either position.
Okay, is that it? We'll open the council members for questions, clarifying questions to the chief. I see Councilmember Widmer.
Yeah, so on this and all the other deals, okay, are they immediate or are they being planned for the budget going forward starting in July?
Starting in July.
Okay, all right, that wasn't
for the
clear.
traffic sergeant, which I'd like to start now, and I believe we can if everyone's in agreement. But the other three would all be proposals for the budget coming up.
All right, good. I fully support all of them. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Vice Mayor?
I do have one question, which I guess it seems like an odd mix of skills. Are we expecting to be able to find someone for this job?
Good question. And talking about career advancement and availability, we have a current dispatcher who is interested in it. Of course, because I'm letting staff know the request I'm making, of course, no guarantees, but she has the skill set and the personality that I think would fit. It's not guaranteed that it would be her, but we certainly have to open it up internally first before we're to go outside the agency. And again, it is a good question because dispatching, it's a very unique skill. It takes a long time to come up to speed. Code enforcement, same thing, coming up to speed. But if I have a candidate within that knows the community, knows the streets, can work with Monica well, that would be a bonus.
Mm-hmm. Any other council member want to ask a question at this point? Councilmember DeGolia?
Questions?
Councilmember Diana?
I just want to be clear, right now, we're just discussing these new positions, but we're not approving them because doesn't approving has to come part of a broader budget? Because obviously I agree in the positions, but if we end up that we don't have the money in our broader budget, then we're going to have to, you know what I'm trying to say? Are we just agreeing on the premise of the position right now?
This will be part, yes, and this will be part of the detailed budget process that we'll be going through until the start of the fiscal year with Mr. Rodericks and Robert Barron.
So the action before us right now is just, do we think we need these new positions and these changes?
So feedback and direction, correct.
Except for the sergeant.
Except for the sergeant, that's correct.
But I think what we're trying to do is so we can incorporate them into the budget planning process as conceptually approved by council at this point. Any other questions? Any public want to weigh in on this? If we have any members of the public that have joined us, Anthony? No?
Nope, none.
Okay. So let's bring it back to council for comments on this. It's adding a new position, and it would be a full-time position for code enforcement, and as I understand, / dispatch. Correct? Which seems to make a lot of sense to me. And the salary range, anticipated salary, it's a pretty big salary range, but is that within what Daly City, Colma? I meant Colma would be for this time.
Yeah, it looked like the Colma range was most consistent, and they're about the same size police department and dispatch center as us. So I think that probably on the lower end, and then start going into steps. That would be part of working with Robert in the budget process.
So I honestly, since Monica has come on board in her position, it's really been remarkable how proactive she's been and how good she's been. But she's just sinking in so many cases, and it doesn't seem to let up. And so I think this is a really smart addition, and to have them cross-trained and multiple talents, and it's really important that we kind of spread the wealth around here because we're such a small agency.
If I can make a comment on that, Mayor. Code enforcement, as you know, just like in law enforcement, our intent is not to generate revenue, but obviously with code enforcement, there are fines levied. I believe last year there were $80,000 worth of code enforcement fines. And again, with additional capacity, again, not that we're out there for revenue, it's just going to be hand in hand, that you will see probably an increase in revenue, which in my opinion would help offset this position's cost.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any comments or motion to move?
Do we need a motion?
We don't need a motion, just the feedback.
Okay.
And we're done.
Wanting to, make this official, but yes, I think we've given lots of feedback. And Chief, I appreciate all the hard work you've done putting these staff reports and proposals together for us and walking us through. There's been a lot of thought put in it, and I think that this is all very positive for our town and very necessary.
Well, thank you. I couldn't do it without the help of George's big red pen.
He's got a big one there.
We're good partners in crime, and I do really appreciate the ongoing support that you show the police department, the fact that you took all these requests serious, obviously did your homework with great questions. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Chief, can I ask you a quick question? It's Anthony.
No.
Did Boyle happen to get anybody ask if the city clerk's department needed anything?
No.
Oh, thank you.
Anthony, are you feeling a little overworked?
Vice Mayor Lempers made a good question about police department donations, and I've never worked in a place where people are so generous with the police department. I'm happy to, discuss offline or whatever about or donations. And believe me, we're not out there with a fireman's boot or a bucket saying, hey, we need money. The people they like what we do. They like the work. They're very thankful, and they come out of the woodwork with these donations. It's amazing to me. My other chiefs are very, very jealous.
I don't know if that was a dig at my work, but I appreciate you guys too.
Yeah, thank you.
We can.
Madam Mayor, if I could, I did ask you about the donations, and I would love to hear a sort of more comprehensive view on that, along with this new issue about radio encryption that seems to be coming up on the peninsula. I'd love to, at a future meeting, learn more about any plans Atherton has in that regard.
Yeah, George and I have been working quite closely with that, and I put some information together again. And I don't, as you can imagine, I don't want you guys have to endure or have anything issues related to Palo Alto. I think that was very unfortunate. I don't think we're going to have that here, because bottom line for our police agencies, it's a mandate. There's no options. We have to move forward with it. And I'm happy to go into detail with that later.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is council members' comments or reports, announcements. Anybody want to say anything? I do. No, I have a couple of announcements. If you give me just 2 minutes, I think I've got that. January 29th, Friday, January 29th is the first Council of Cities meeting dinner, and it will be Zoomed from Brisbane. So it would be really nice if, we could have some of our council members log on and just kind of participate and show our faces. I plan to, so we'll look at January 29th for that, Brisbane, and I think I sent out the notice. Then going all the way to September 24th, Atherton will be hosting the Council of Cities dinner meeting. And at this time, I think we're planning on it being Zoomed, but wouldn't it be lovely if we could have an open dinner event at our new town center for all of San Mateo County elected officials and their wives, spouses, special friends to attend. So that's September 24th. We have that to look forward to, and I'll take any offline suggestions, ideas, and collaboration. With that, I don't have anything. If anyone else does, I think Robert has a follow-up PowerPoint presentation just to end us.
Yes. No PowerPoint.
Not
Just saved.
Okay.
Not tonight.
I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Okay, meeting adjourned. Nice study session, everyone. Thank you.